I was born into a world that was confined and defined by the rules of the bishop. Our home was a simple, solitary place, situated far away from the bustle of towns or even the smallest trace of society. I grew up surrounded by family, a father who was quiet but loving, a mother whose warmth and kindness were woven into the fabric of our daily routines, and my siblings, each one of us tightly knit together by the foundation of the bishop's laws. Every morning we woke up to the sound of bells ringing from the small chapel, signaling the start of our daily prayers. The days were full of the same unchanging rhythm: prayers, meals, work in the fields, and the occasional quiet time by the creek. Life was simple, even in its austerity. At that age, simplicity was everything to me. My world was clear, defined by a set of rules that felt comforting in their rigidity. There was little room for anything outside of the day-to-day structure, and even in the absence of much else, there was a sense of peace, one that I had known my entire life. My siblings were my constant companions. We would spend our days playing in the fields, running barefoot across the grass, and wading in the creek when we could. There was something uniquely refreshing about the water that ran there. It felt pure and clean, as though it held the very essence of nature in its flow. Of all my siblings, though, it was Ten, my younger sister, who held a special place in my heart. She was the one who made the rigid world of the bishop seem less confining. While the rest of us tried to follow the rules of the bishop as best as we could, Ten always found ways to make life more carefree. She was the wild one, the one who would stray from the path, run too far from the house, and always find something new to get into. There was a free-spiritedness to her that I admired, even if I didn't always understand it. I loved her in ways I couldn't yet put into words. I loved her laughter, the way she would tug at my sleeve when she wanted me to follow her into the woods, and the way her messy hair would whip around her face as she ran with reckless joy. I loved how she could make me forget about the rules of the world, even if it was only for a brief moment. And I admired the way she didn't seem to care about what anyone thought of her. She lived in the moment, and in that, she taught me to do the same, even though I didn't yet know how to fully embrace it. Our family life, while dominated by the bishop's authority, had its moments of warmth. When we weren't working or praying, we would gather around the fire, of my father telling stories about the past, my mother humming soft lullabies to us, and we would listen to the wind whisper through the trees. The simple pleasures of that life, close-knit and sacred, were all I knew. There was no outside world to measure our lives against. The world was right here in this isolated haven. And yet, beneath the calm of this existence, there was always a sense that something was just beyond my grasp. The rules of the bishop were unyielding, and even as I respected them, I found myself wondering if there was more. Sometimes when I was alone, I would walk to the creek and sit by the water, staring into its clear depths. The world seemed so much bigger there, beyond the confines of the house and the bishop's expectations. And yet, it was always this place that made me feel most at home. The water was still, and yet always moving. A paradox I would never fully understand, but that brought me a strange sense of comfort. I never thought much about the future. It was enough to know that I had my family, my routines, and my faith. It was enough to know that we would always have the bishop's guidance, even if it meant living in a world far removed from others. But all of that changed on one simple afternoon, the kind of day that, in hindsight, I could never have predicted would mark the beginning of everything falling apart. It was a day like any other. The sun was high in the sky, casting its warm golden light across the fields as I and my siblings worked outside. Ten had disappeared for a while, as she often did, but I thought little of it at first. She had a way of slipping away from the house when she needed to, something I'd come to accept without much thought. But the day wore on, and I found myself looking for her. At first, it was nothing more than a fleeting thought. Where had she gone? But as time passed, that question began to grow. I looked around the house and called her name, but there was no response. As the hours stretched on, the creeping sense of unease began to settle in my chest. Something was wrong. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. Still, no Ten. I remember the feeling that overtook me as I stepped outside the house, walking towards the creek where we had so often played together. Maybe she had gone there, I thought. I don't know why I thought that, but I felt it in my gut. I reached the creek and she wasn't there. My heart began to race. I called her name again, louder this time, almost shouting it into the empty space around me. The wind rustled the leaves and the world seemed to hold its breath. I walked up and down the creek, peering into the bushes and the trees, but there was no sign of her. Panic gripped me. A sick feeling began to settle in my stomach, and I turned back to the house, running now, my feet pounding the earth. My family was already gathering, asking each other if anyone had seen her, but no one had. My mother's face was pale with worry, and my father's brow furrowed with confusion. Even the bishop, who rarely left his post at the chapel, appeared suddenly, his face lined with concern. He called for a search, though his voice lacked conviction. There was something hollow about it, something that felt wrong. We scoured the land for hours, calling her name into the still evening air, but she didn't return. By nightfall, 10 was still missing, and the air around us seemed thick with dread. The world I had known, this simple, peaceful life, was beginning to feel fractured. My sister, the one who had always brought joy and laughter, was gone. And I didn't know why. I couldn't fathom it. That night I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, too quiet. There was a hollowness in the air that I couldn't shake. I felt as though the very earth beneath me had shifted, and I had no place to stand. Where was 10? Why was she gone? I spent the hours after midnight staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a jumbled mess. It was as if the world had cracked open, and all the security, all the warmth, all the simplicity that had once been my life had vanished with her. I didn't understand what was happening. I couldn't have known it then, but that was the beginning of something far darker than I could imagine. The void she left in my heart wasn't just a gap of missing love. It was the beginning of a sickness of the soul that would consume me in ways that would be impossible to explain. And in that moment of loss, the world shifted. I began to feel that something deep inside me was starting to change. Something dark, like a virus, was spreading through my heart and mind. I had no way of knowing just how far that sickness would go, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The loss of 10 was the beginning of everything falling apart. The joy, the simplicity, the routines, all of it was slipping through my fingers like sand, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Nothing to fill the void she had left behind. Little did I know, the descent was only beginning. 10 was gone, and in her absence, a hole began to form inside me, a space that had once been full of light, now swallowed by an unbearable darkness. The days passed, each one dragging on longer than the last. I could feel the loss gnawing at me, eating away at whatever semblance of normality I had left. The bishop had called for a search, of course. His voice echoed with a hollow urgency, his words falling into the quiet of the house like dead leaves drifting in the wind. We combed the fields, the creek, the woods around our home, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had vanished into the very air, disappeared like mist at dawn. But what unnerved me more than her absence was the peculiar sense of detachment that began to settle in my chest. I should have been more desperate, more frantic, everyone around me was. But all I could do was stand there, numb. I'd never experienced loss before, not in any real sense. I had never known that a person could be here one moment and gone the next, leaving only a gaping void in their place. The house felt wrong now, like a shell with no soul. Everything that had once been familiar now felt cold, alien. The quiet that had once been comforting now suffocated me. The very air around me seemed thick, heavy, filled with something I couldn't grasp but could only feel. It was as though the space 10 had occupied, her laugh, her chatter, her messiness, had left a physical absence, a weight that pressed down on me. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Not my mother, not my father, not even the bishop. They all tried to maintain the routines, to search for her with a quiet, practiced hope, but it felt wrong. I felt like I was in a dream where I was a bystander, unable to influence anything around me, merely observing as the world I had known slowly slipped away. The days blurred together in a haze. I would wander the house, my feet carrying me to the places 10 and I had once shared, the corners of the yard where we had played, the creek where we had sat and talked about things that didn't matter, the spaces where our laughter had once echoed. But now there was nothing but silence. Her absence began to wrap around me like a suffocating blanket, and with it, a creeping sickness began to take hold. It started with a dull ache in my chest, an emptiness I couldn't shake. It felt like something inside me had fractured, like a piece of me was gone, and I didn't know how to get it back. I began to retreat further into myself. I stopped talking to my family, to anyone. They were all so caught up in the search, in the rituals that helped them maintain some semblance of normality, but I couldn't bring myself to engage. The world outside of me seemed distant, foreign. It wasn't just grief. It was as though something inside me was slowly decaying. I began to wonder if I'd ever truly known Ten at all. The memories that once felt so vivid, the sound of her voice, the touch of her hand in mine, the way she would tug at my sleeve and smile as we ran through the fields, began to blur, fading into a haze. I couldn't trust them anymore. I couldn't trust my own mind. Had she even been real? Or had I just invented her in some dreamlike fantasy of happiness and innocence? The thought terrified me, gnawing at me like a sickness of the soul. If I couldn't trust my memories, what could I trust? The more I thought about it, the more I doubted myself. Was any of it real? Her smile? The sound of her voice? Had she ever truly existed, or had I imagined it all? I wanted to scream, to cry out for her, but my voice felt dead in my throat. The virus of despair was spreading, creeping through my veins, infecting every corner of my mind, until all that remained was the dark, hollow emptiness that consumed me. I began to question everything. The way the world worked, the way my life had been, the way my mind seemed to bend and warp around the absence of Ten. There were moments when I felt detached from reality, as if I were watching myself from afar. I would stand in the middle of a room and not know how I had gotten there or what I was supposed to be doing. It was as though my own life had become a dream that I couldn't wake up from. The pain inside me was something I couldn't articulate, something that I didn't even understand. It wasn't just grief, it was a suffocating, consuming force, like a sickness invading my very soul. Every breath felt like it was pulling me deeper into an abyss. There were moments when I couldn't remember who I was or why I was even alive. Was this what it meant to be human? To feel this deep emptiness? Was this the cost of love, this gnawing, relentless pain that refused to let go? The days stretched on and I found myself losing track of time. The sun rose and set, but it didn't matter. I felt no connection to it. The sky, the stars, the moon, nothing seemed to make sense anymore. I would sit by the creek for hours, staring at the water that had once brought me peace, but now it seemed just as lost as I was. The water flowed, relentless and unchanged, but it felt distant, as if I were no longer a part of it. I tried to reach out to my family, but there was nothing I could say that would make sense of what was happening to me. My mother would cry for Ten. My father would mumble prayers, and my siblings would go on, each in their own way, trying to hold on to the lives we had once known. But I couldn't join them. I couldn't bring myself to feel their grief the way they did. Their pain seemed so pure, so real, while mine felt like something darker, something that I couldn't even understand. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me. The darkness of the room seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with its silence. It was in these moments that I felt it the most, the sickness. It wasn't just a feeling of loss anymore, it was something deeper, something consuming. The virus of despair had taken root in my soul, and I couldn't escape it. I couldn't tell anyone, though. How could I? How could I explain that the pain of losing Ten had become a part of me, that her absence had infected every part of my being? I couldn't bring myself to speak of it. So I withdrew further, retreating into myself, lost in a fog of confusion and fear. The world seemed so distant, and yet I was trapped in it, unable to find a way out. It wasn't until one night when I found myself alone in the chapel, staring at the flickering candlelight, that I began to understand what was happening to me. The sickness wasn't just about Ten. It was about something deeper, something that went beyond loss. It was about the emptiness that had taken root in my heart, the belief that love was fleeting, that everything I had once held dear was destined to disappear. The virus of despair was feeding on my fear, my doubt, my confusion, and I didn't know how to stop it. As I sat there in the stillness, my thoughts became a storm. I closed my eyes, but all I could see was the dark emptiness that had taken hold of my heart. And that was when I realized this sickness wasn't just a part of me, it was consuming me. The more I tried to resist, the deeper it burrowed into my soul. But even in my despair, something deep within me whispered a truth I couldn't ignore. This was just the beginning. The virus was only just starting to show its true form, and I was sinking deeper into it with each passing day. The weight of the silence was unbearable. It had begun to feel like the house itself had forgotten how to breathe. The soft creaks of the wooden floors, the occasional rustle of leaves outside, the hum of distant wind, all of it had stopped mattering. The world seemed so distant now, each day blurred into the next, each hour stretching on in a fog of heaviness. It was late one night when it finally broke. I was sitting in the corner of my room, my legs pulled tightly to my chest, arms wrapped around my knees in some attempt to shield myself from the suffocating emptiness that surrounded me. The house was still, the kind of stillness that presses in on you, making your chest tighten and your breath shallow. I could feel it then, the sickness. It wasn't just something in my mind anymore, it had become a presence. It wrapped itself around my body, filled my veins with a cold numbness. Every breath felt labored, as if I were drowning under the weight of my own existence. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape her absence. There was no place to hide anymore. I had tried to bury myself in the routines of life, prayer, chores, even sitting by the creek, but they were empty now. The sunlight that used to bathe the earth in warmth felt like a cold mockery. The water in the creek no longer held the same sparkle. It was nothing more than dark liquid that slid by, as lifeless as I felt. I tried to speak out loud and release the pressure building in my chest, but the words would not come. They died in my throat, lost before they could form. I was surrounded by people, but I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. My family, my siblings, the bishop, they all seemed like shadows to me now, just faint outlines in the distance. They went on with their lives, searching for Ten, praying, holding on to the hope that she would be found, that everything would return to normal. But I knew it would never be normal again. I couldn't tell them what I was feeling. I couldn't tell anyone. The sickness in me was too deep, too pervasive. It had settled into the marrow of my bones, into the very core of who I was. My mind had become a battlefield, and the virus, this virus of despair, was winning. I tried to focus, to break through the fog that had settled over me. I would sit in silence, sometimes for hours, trying to remember what it felt like before all of this, before the loss, before the emptiness. I wanted to remember what it was like to laugh, to feel joy, to feel anything other than this crushing weight. But the harder I tried, the more the memories faded. I couldn't reach them. I couldn't bring them back. The world outside the window seemed unreal, like it was happening in another life, one that no longer belonged to me. I watched the trees sway, the sky change colors as the day turned to night, and yet I felt no connection to it. The beauty of the world, the sun rising, the soft rustle of the leaves, was just an illusion, a dream I couldn't wake up from. My family began to notice that something was wrong. They couldn't see it, not in the way I could. I had become a hollow version of myself, a specter walking through life, lost in a fog of darkness. My mother, concerned, would sit beside me and ask if I was feeling okay, but when I tried to speak, my voice felt like a lie. I couldn't even say that I felt broken. How could I explain it? How could I put into words the suffocating emptiness that filled me every moment? How could I say that I felt like I was no longer alive? I began to question everything. The pain in my chest didn't make sense. It was more than grief. It was more than sorrow. It felt like my very essence had been sucked away, and there was nothing left but a void. The thought of being in this world, of waking up every morning, of going through the motions of surviving each day, felt unbearable. My existence was a cruel joke, a shadow of the person I had been. I couldn't bear to look at my reflection anymore. My face, my eyes, they felt like they belonged to someone else. The boy in the mirror seemed distant, disconnected from the soul that was supposed to inhabit him. Who was I anymore? What had I become? The sickness had poisoned everything. My thoughts, my feelings, my very sense of self. I began to withdraw even more. I couldn't bring myself to speak to my siblings. I couldn't join them when they would gather around the table for meals or when they would pray together. I couldn't share their hope, their faith. How could I? My faith was gone. It had been consumed by the darkness, by the endless questions that plagued me. What was the point of praying when all the prayers in the world hadn't brought 10 back? What was the point of doing anything when everything felt so hopeless? The nights were the hardest. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the darkness pressing down on me. The silence of the house was overwhelming. It was in the stillness that I felt most alone, most empty. It was as if the very walls were closing in around me, suffocating me. I began to wonder if I was even alive. Was I still part of this world? Was everything that had happened just a dream? Some nightmare that I would eventually wake from? But I knew deep down that it wasn't. I wasn't dreaming. This was real. The ache in my chest, the hollow emptiness in my heart, it was all too real. I wondered if anyone could see the darkness consuming me. Could anyone tell that I was sinking deeper, further into the void? Or was I just invisible to them? I didn't know. I didn't know anything anymore. The world around me felt like a distant memory, a life I no longer recognized. The days went on, and I sank further into my thoughts. The virus of despair was not just a sickness, it was becoming my identity. It was seeping into every part of me, defining me. The boy I had been, the boy who had laughed with 10 by the creek, who had felt the warmth of the sun on his face, was gone. In his place was a hollow shell, consumed by the sickness of loss. I couldn't see a way out. There was no way back to what I had known, to the boy I had been before. And the darkness, it was only growing stronger. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't hide from it. It had already begun to define my every thought, my every breath. And so I sank further, deeper into the abyss, unable to escape the grip of despair. It had been days since I had spoken to anyone, days since I had left my room, since I had faced the world that felt so foreign to me. The emptiness had settled into my bones like cold, and I could feel it crawling through every vein, every fiber of my being. I had stopped trying to understand it. I had stopped trying to fight it. My mind, too, had become numb, an endless loop of darkness and confusion. The sickness of my soul was so deep now, so complete, that I couldn't see any escape. One night, after a long stretch of sleepless hours, I lay on my bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. The weight of the world seemed to crush me, its heaviness more than I could bear. My thoughts felt like a tangle of broken glass, sharp and jagged. I couldn't piece them together anymore. I couldn't even remember what it felt like to feel anything but the weight of despair. I thought in that moment that there was no reason to go on, no reason to try. I remembered the cold. I remember the emptiness, the silence that stretched out like a desert, endless and barren. My chest felt as though it were being crushed by an unseen hand, my heart beating slower, quieter. The air in the room was thin, and I couldn't get enough of it. My limbs were heavy, paralyzed by the weight of my thoughts. The world as I knew it was fading away. And then, without warning, the darkness wrapped itself tighter around me, pulling me down. It was as if the very fabric of reality had unraveled, and I was falling through it, spiraling into an abyss that had no end. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the end. There was nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to pull me back. My mind was consumed by a black void, one that had no edges, no contours, just infinite darkness. But then, just as I thought I had lost everything, something changed. A light, a soft, gentle light. It appeared as if from nowhere, its glow warm and inviting, not harsh or blinding, but calm and encompassing. It surrounded me in a way that I couldn't describe, like it was filling the empty space inside me, soothing the broken parts of my soul. There was no fear in it, no judgment, no harshness. It was the kind of light that promised peace, that promised release. I wasn't afraid. I felt no panic. I felt no anxiety. I only felt comfort. And then, standing in the light, I saw him, Jesus. I don't know how I knew it was him, but I did. His presence was unmistakable. There was a quiet authority in the way he stood, an energy around him that felt both powerful and completely gentle. He was taller than I could have imagined, but not in a way that made him intimidating. He was familiar. He smiled at me, and in that smile, there was a depth of love I couldn't have conceived of in my earthly life. It wasn't the kind of love I had experienced before, not the love of family or friends. This love was different, pure, unconditional, and infinite. It radiated from him like a warmth that enveloped me entirely, like he was reaching out, not just to me, but to the very core of my being. His eyes, oh, his eyes. They were the clearest eyes I had ever seen, filled with compassion, understanding, and something else, something deeper. It was as if he knew everything about me, all my pain, my sorrow, my brokenness, and yet there was no judgment in those eyes. There was no condemnation. Only an overwhelming understanding, like he had walked the same path I had, felt the same pain, and had come to heal it. And then he spoke. "Do not be afraid, my child." His voice was like a song, soft and calming, yet full of power. It filled the space around me, and I could feel the vibrations of it deep inside my chest, in the very center of my soul. "You are not alone." His words were not just spoken to me, they were felt. It was like each syllable was a balm for the wounds I hadn't even known I carried. The hurt I had lived with for so long, the ache from Ten's absence, the darkness that had consumed me, all of it began to fade under the warmth of his love. It was as if his presence had the power to erase the sorrow, to wipe away the broken pieces of me and make them whole again. "I have seen your suffering," he continued, his gaze softening, and I could feel the weight of his compassion. "I know your pain, and I have come to heal it. You are loved more than you can understand. Even in your darkest moments, you have never been alone. You are held in the arms of love." The words were simple, but the power behind them, the truth of them, was undeniable. I had been drowning, sinking into the blackness, and now I was being pulled from it. His love was a lifeline, and he was holding me, lifting me from the depths of despair. It was not just a promise, it was a reality that I could feel with every fiber of my being. "Forgiveness," he said, his voice low and steady, "is the key. It is the key to healing, the key to freedom. You are forgiven, all of you, everything you carry, everything that has hurt you. Let it go. It has no power over you anymore." In that moment, I felt something inside me release. The tightness that had held me captive for so long loosened. The anger, the confusion, the weight of my grief, it all began to dissolve, replaced by a peace I had never known. I felt lighter, freer, as if the burden of my own sorrow had been lifted, and I was standing in the presence of something pure and holy. He stepped closer, his face gentle but filled with the wisdom of the ages. "Remember, even in the deepest darkness, there is always light. It may seem distant, but it is always there. All you need to do is turn toward it." I didn't understand at first what he meant by that. How could there be light when the darkness seemed so complete, so all-encompassing? But as I looked into his eyes, I understood. The light he spoke of wasn't just something outside of me, it was within. I had been so focused on the darkness that I had failed to see the light within myself. The love that was there, always there, waiting for me to recognize it. "You are never alone," he said, and as he spoke, I felt his love wrap around me like a blanket, warming me, comforting me, healing me. The hole inside me, the emptiness that had felt so unbearable, began to fill with something I couldn't explain, something more profound than anything I had ever known. "Trust," he continued, his gaze unshakable, full of compassion and infinite patience. "Trust that you are loved, that you are held in my hands. You are part of something far greater than you understand." And then, with a final loving smile, he said, "Go in peace. Know that you are never lost, you are always found." His words stayed with me long after he had faded from my sight, as if they were etched into the very fabric of my soul. I didn't know what it meant to be found or to go in peace, but I felt the truth of his words in a way that was beyond explanation. And then the light began to fade, slowly and gently, as though it was pulling away, not out of distance, but out of a sense of completion. I didn't want to let go, but I felt his presence linger in my heart, even as the world around me began to shift once more. The darkness of the night returned, but now it was different. It wasn't the all-consuming void it had been before. It was just darkness. Darkness that held no power over me anymore. I had been touched by something greater, something divine. And as I drifted into unconsciousness, I knew that I would never be the same again. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the dark void anymore. No, I was somewhere entirely different, somewhere I had never even imagined possible. I was standing at the edge of a field, my feet sinking into the soft, dewy grass beneath me. The air was thick with a sweetness I had never known, a fragrance that filled my lungs with every breath. The sky above was a deep, luminous gold, like the sun had bathed the entire world in its warmth, but it wasn't overwhelming. It was gentle, soft, and it seemed to cradle everything it touched. Beside me, Jesus stood, his presence both steady and serene. I could feel him, not just beside me, but within me too, like his very being was part of the air I breathed. He did not speak at first, but I could sense his invitation, his silent encouragement for me to step forward, to explore this place with him. So I did. As I took my first step, I felt a kind of peace wash over me that I had never known before. Every step felt lighter than the last, as if I was walking not on earth, but on a substance far gentler, far more real than anything I had ever known. I didn't need to worry about where I was going or what I would find. It felt as if I had always belonged here, as if I had always known this place, even in my earthly life, though I had never seen it until now. Where are we? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, afraid to disturb the beauty that enveloped me. Jesus turned to me with a smile, his eyes deep pools of infinite understanding. "This is heaven," he said, his voice as soft and clear as the golden light surrounding us. A place of peace, of eternal love. It is not just a destination, but the essence of all things good, all things true. The world around me seemed to shimmer with his words. We began to walk, and as we did, the landscape opened up before us in the most wondrous way. Fields of flowers stretched out as far as the eye could see, but these were no ordinary flowers. They glowed softly in the golden light, each one a different color, radiant in its own unique way, but all of them held a perfect harmony in their beauty. The flowers didn't just exist, they sang! I could hear the sound of their petals in the wind, like a gentle hum, a whisper that echoed the music of the spheres. It was a melody of love, one that resonated not in my ears, but in the deepest corners of my soul. It was as if each note carried with it a promise of belonging, of wholeness, of grace. We continued our walk, and as we passed the flowers, I noticed the rivers, crystal clear streams of water that sparkled as if they had been drawn from the heavens themselves. They flowed peacefully through the landscape, weaving between the trees that lined the banks, their leaves shimmering with a light I couldn't explain. The water wasn't just water, it was alive, flowing with an energy that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the heartbeat of the universe. It was cool, refreshing, and it held a kind of purity I had never known before. Everywhere I looked, the world was alive with peace, with balance, with beauty. The air was thick with love, not in a way that overwhelmed, but in a way that held a gentle, unwavering embrace. The sky, the land, the trees, the water, the flowers, they were all part of the same thing. They existed in perfect harmony, as if they were all breathing together, moving together, living together. It was a kind of unity I had never seen, a kind of peace I had never known, and it was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. Jesus smiled at me again, sensing the questions in my heart, and he spoke. "This is the world you have come from," he said, his voice soft, but with the weight of eternity in it. "This is the essence of love, the world that was created by love and is sustained by love. Heaven is not just a place, it is the truth of everything. It is the love that holds all things together. All creation exists in this love." I stopped walking, overwhelmed by the enormity of his words, the depth of their meaning. This is love, I thought. This is what it truly means to love and to be loved. It was so simple and yet so vast, so deep. Love was not just a fleeting emotion, a temporary feeling. It was the very fabric of existence, the foundation of all things, the reason behind everything. Jesus nodded, as if he had read my thoughts. "Yes," he said, "love is the ultimate truth. It is the force that moves the universe, the heartbeat of all things. Without love, nothing exists. With love, everything is possible." I could feel it now deep in my chest. The understanding was not just intellectual, it was felt, as if my very body and soul had been aligned with this truth. Love was not something I could grasp with my mind alone. It was something I had to experience to truly understand. As we continued to walk, the scenery changed. We found ourselves in a magnificent city, unlike any city I had ever seen. There were no tall buildings, no crowds rushing about, no distractions. Instead, it was a city of light, streets lined with radiant stones, buildings that seemed to glow with an inner fire, and an air that was filled with a sense of calm and harmony. The people who lived there, if they could even be called people, for they were more like beings of pure light, moved through the city with grace and peace. There was no rush, no hurry. No one seemed to want or need anything, for everything they could ever need was already provided for them. They lived not in isolation, but in unity with one another, with the world around them. Their eyes shone with a light I had never seen before, a light that reflected the same love I had felt since I arrived. And as they passed by, they smiled, their smiles full of warmth, full of acceptance, full of love. There was no jealousy, no hate, no fear. There was only peace. I looked at Jesus, and he met my gaze with the same understanding in his eyes. "This is what you were created for," he said. "This is what you and everyone were meant to experience. The love that binds all things together. This is what 10 has entered into. She is here, in this peace, in this love. Her transformation was not an end, but a beginning. She is alive in this love, and so are you. All of you." A strange comfort washed over me as I processed his words. I had feared that 10's passing had been the end of her, that she had simply ceased to exist. But now I understood. Her death was not the end of her. It was just the doorway to something far greater, to a love that was beyond anything we could comprehend on earth. She was alive, not in some far-off place, but in the light of love itself. And as I walked with Jesus through that radiant city, I understood something else, that this love was not just a concept. It was not just a feeling or an abstract idea. It was the truth. It was the force that held the universe together, and it was the answer to every question, the solution to every problem. It was the cure for every sickness, the answer to every fear. "Love is the answer," Jesus said, his voice full of quiet certainty. "It always has been, and it always will be." I didn't need to ask any more questions. I didn't need to search for any more answers. I knew in the depths of my being that this was the truth. Love was the ultimate reality, the foundation of everything, the reason we were all here. And I knew then, with all my heart, that this was the world 10 had entered. This world of eternal love, this world of peace, this world where suffering and sorrow had no place. She was home, and somehow so was I. I don't know how it happened, but the serene light of heaven suddenly began to flicker, like the world I had been walking through was fading, slipping into another place, another time. And then I felt it, the weight of something oppressive pressing against me, pulling me away from the golden fields, from the peace I had just begun to understand. Suddenly, I wasn't standing on the soft grass of heaven anymore. No, I was somewhere else. The light that had bathed me in warmth turned cold and dim. The beauty of the landscape vanished, replaced by a harsh, jagged reality that sent a chill through my soul. I was standing in a place that felt all too familiar, yet infinitely worse. The ground beneath me was dry and cracked, like the earth itself had been drained of life. There was no sweetness in the air, only the stench of burning things, of despair and decay. I heard shouting, cries of pain, the clatter of metal against metal, the sound of humanity's suffering echoing through the empty space. I looked around, and the world that lay before me was a twisted reflection of what I had once known. People wandered, their faces gaunt and hollow, eyes filled with a deep emptiness. Their bodies were battered, as though they had been fighting for far too long, for reasons they could no longer remember. The land was in ruins, buildings shattered, rivers polluted, fields barren. Everywhere I looked, there was pain. I saw wars, people fighting one another, their faces contorted with hatred, their hands stained with the blood of the innocent. I saw families torn apart, children wandering the streets alone, their eyes wide with fear, their bodies thin from hunger. The sky was gray, filled with the smoke of distant fires, and the earth beneath me seemed to groan under the weight of its own destruction. In the distance, I saw myself. There I was, just another figure lost in the chaos, weighed down by the same burdens, the same hopelessness. I stood among the others, my heart heavy with grief, with confusion, with pain. It was as if I had become part of the suffering, as if I was no different from the broken world around me. It was in that moment that I understood. The earth I had once known, the world I had left behind, was a place consumed by despair. The purity I had felt in heaven, the love that had radiated from every corner of that realm, was absent here. Here there was only darkness, a darkness that seemed to cling to every soul, every heart, every thought. It was as if the virus, the sickness I had felt growing within me, The virus of despair was not something that had only affected me. It was a sickness that had spread like a plague across the earth. It was in the hearts of the people, in the very air they breathed, in the pain they inflicted upon each other. The world was infected, and that infection ran deep. And then, in the midst of all the suffering, a voice broke through the chaos. It was Jesus. His voice, calm and steady, reached me like a lifeline through the storm of misery. "You must go back," he said. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of eternity. "You must carry the message of love, for love is the only cure to this sickness. The world is lost, but there is still time to heal it." His voice seemed to cut through the darkness like a blade of light, and as he spoke, the vision around me shifted. I could see the people, all of them, each one carrying their own burdens, each one trapped in their own cycle of suffering. I saw the hatred in their eyes, the fear in their hearts, the despair that seemed to consume them. But even in the darkest corners, there was a flicker, a tiny fragile spark of something. It was the faintest glimmer of light, hidden beneath the layers of pain, but it was there. And I understood then what he meant. The world was sick, but it wasn't beyond saving. There was still hope, still time for healing, but it wouldn't come from force, from war, or from anger. It would only come through love. Jesus stepped forward, his presence filling the space around me. "Love is the answer," he said, his voice filled with a gentle but unyielding strength. "Love is the only force that can break through the darkness, that can heal the wounds of this world. It is the antidote to despair, the cure for suffering." I looked around again, and this time I saw the faces of the people differently. Their suffering, their pain, was not something that had to define them. It was not something that had to last forever. But the road to healing was long, and it would require something from them, from all of us. It would require a choice to let go of hatred, of fear, of division, a choice to embrace love, to spread it to every corner of the world, to every broken heart, every wounded soul. "You have been shown the truth," Jesus said, his voice full of both love and urgency. "Now you must take it back with you. The world needs this message more than it knows. There is still time, but you must act. You must share what you have seen, what you have felt, so that others may know the way. Only then will the earth begin to heal." I nodded, my heart burning with a fierce determination that had not been there before. I understood now. My pain, my grief, the loss of 10, these were not just personal struggles. They were part of a larger story, part of a larger reality. The suffering I had experienced was not just my own, it was shared by the whole world. And the love I had felt in heaven, the peace I had discovered, was the cure. But I also knew this: it would not be easy. The road ahead would be long and difficult. The world was broken, and its healing would not come overnight. It would require patience, strength, and sacrifice. It would require people to look beyond their own suffering, to embrace the suffering of others, and to love in ways they had never thought possible. "Do not forget what you have learned," Jesus said, his eyes locking with mine, filled with both compassion and strength. "You are the messenger. You must carry the light of love into the darkness." And then, as quickly as it had begun, the vision began to fade. The world around me, the broken, suffering world, dissolved into nothingness, leaving only the golden light of heaven. But the message remained, etched in my heart, as clear and undeniable as the love that had brought me here in the first place. I understood now. The journey I had started, the descent into despair, the encounter with love, it was all part of something bigger. My mission had just begun, and no matter how hard the path would be, I knew one thing for certain: love was the answer, and it was the only thing that could heal the world's wounds. With that knowledge, I prepared to return to Earth, knowing that my journey was far from over. I don't remember much of how I got there, but when I woke up, it was clear something had changed. The sterile, bright lights above me were like an assault to my senses, sharp and unforgiving. The beeping of machines, the quiet shuffle of footsteps, these things felt so distant, so disconnected from the place I had just left. It took me a few moments to gather my bearings, to even realize where I was. I was in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines that beeped rhythmically. My body felt weak, like every inch of me had been drained of energy, but my mind, it was clear, too clear. The fog that had clouded my thoughts, the heavy weight of despair that had pressed down on me for so long, it was gone. In its place was something bright, something pure. I remembered it all. I remembered heaven. I remembered the light, the peace, the love, and I remembered Jesus. His voice still echoed in my soul, a soft whisper that would never fade. "You must go back," he had said. "You must carry the message of love." I knew then that my journey was not over. It had only just begun. The paramedics were amazed. They didn't understand how I had survived. They had expected the worst. But I knew why I was still here. I had been given a second chance. No, more than that. I had been given a purpose, and nothing, not even the hollow ache of loss, would take that from me. When I finally left the hospital, I returned home. But home wasn't the same. It wasn't a sanctuary of peace anymore. My family, my parents, my siblings were still shattered by Ten's disappearance. They moved through their days like ghosts, each of us trapped in our own silent grief. My mother didn't smile. My father's hands trembled when he held a cup. The house felt empty, even though it was full of people. The silence that had once been peaceful when we prayed together now felt suffocating. But I wasn't the same anymore. I couldn't stay in that silence. Not when I had seen the truth. I began speaking, talking about what I had seen, what I had learned, even though no one understood. At first, my words felt out of place, like they were too big for the world I had returned to. My family couldn't grasp the depths of what I was saying. They saw me as someone who had been in the hospital too long, someone who had come back from a place they could never truly understand. I didn't blame them for their confusion, but I also knew I couldn't stop. "The world is broken," I told my mother one evening when she was sitting in her chair by the window staring out at the dull sky. "But love can heal it. Love is the answer. It's the only thing that can heal this world." She looked at me, her face unreadable. She didn't respond at first, and I thought maybe she didn't hear me. But then she spoke, her voice soft and distant. "We're not the same, are we?" I shook my head. "No, I'm different now. I know that love is what we need. It's the only thing that will make a difference in this world." I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't pretend that I hadn't seen the truth. My heart had been broken by the loss of Ten, but in the darkness I had found the light. It was love. The love I had felt in heaven, the love I had seen there. It was real. It wasn't just something you talked about. It was something you lived, and I had to live it. I had to carry it, share it, until it touched everyone. I began speaking to anyone who would listen. I talked to my neighbors, to the people at church, to strangers I met on the street. I told them about the vision I had seen, about heaven and the love that existed there, about how love was the key to healing the suffering of the world. At first, people were skeptical. They looked at me like I was a child with a wild imagination, or worse, someone who had lost his grip on reality. They didn't know what to do with my words, and some of them simply turned away, dismissing me as a lost soul. But I didn't mind. The words had to be spoken. The message had to be shared. Even if no one understood, even if no one listened, I couldn't stop because I had seen the truth, and it had filled my heart with a fire I couldn't ignore. Love was the answer. Love would heal the world. And so I spent my days talking, speaking about the love I had encountered, the peace I had felt, the joy that had washed over me in that other world. I didn't expect everyone to believe me, but I did hope that my words might plant seeds, that they might spark something in others, even if they didn't understand it yet. I couldn't change the world overnight. I couldn't fix the brokenness that had consumed my family, the pain that was still etched on their faces. But I knew one thing. Healing started with love. And that was what I had to give. It was all I had left to offer. I found myself walking to the creek again, where I had once felt a semblance of peace. The water still flowed, its gentle current unchanged, but I had changed. I no longer feared the future. I no longer feared the weight of the world. I knew the truth now. Love was eternal. Love was the one thing that could never be taken from me, and it was the one thing that could heal the world. I thought about Ten. I thought about her smile, her laughter, the way she had always been so carefree, so full of life. I missed her more than words could express, but I knew now that she wasn't truly gone. She was alive in the love that surrounded me, in the love that was all around us. I had seen her in heaven, wrapped in peace in the arms of love. She had been transformed, as all souls are, and though my heart ached for her presence, I knew she was at peace. and that gave me the strength to keep going. I had lost my sister, but in losing her, I had found my purpose. And now, with that purpose in my heart, I would spend the rest of my life sharing the message of love that had been given to me. Because love was the only cure, the only hope for this broken world. And I was determined to carry it, to live it, to spread it until the whole world knew what I had learned.